Kodak's story is not just about a company that failed. It is a story about change. The world doesn't stop moving because one company is successful. Customers change. Technology changes. Entire industries can disappear faster than anyone expects. Kodak once had the opportunity to lead one of the biggest revolutions in history. They had the invention. They had the talent. They had the resources. But they waited too long. And in a world that constantly changes, waiting can be the most dangerous decision. The lesson from Kodak is simple. Never become so comfortable with your success that you stop preparing for the future. Because the companies that survive are not always the biggest. They are the ones that are willing to change. Today, Kodak is remembered as one of the greatest business lessons of all time. A company that saw the future, but struggled to accept it. And maybe the most surprising part of this story is this. The next Kodak is not just a company from the past. It could be any business that believes yesterday's success will guarantee tomorrow's victory. Because history has shown one thing again and again. The future belongs to those who are ready to change. Many people think Kodak failed because it didn't understand technology, but that isn't the full story. Kodak understood the future better than almost anyone. They created the first digital camera. Their engineers knew where the world was going. The problem wasn't a lack of knowledge. The problem was a conflict between the future and the business that made them successful. For decades, Kodak built a massive empire around film. Film sales created billions of dollars in revenue. Every camera sold created demand for more film. Every family photo meant more business for Kodak. Digital photography threatened that entire system. The company faced a difficult choice: destroy the business that made them powerful, or protect it and hope the change would come slowly. They chose protection, and that decision became their biggest mistake. This is one of the hardest lessons in business. Sometimes your greatest success can become your biggest weakness. The thing that made a company powerful today can prevent it from surviving tomorrow. Kodak wasn't defeated by a lack of intelligence. It was defeated by hesitation. While Kodak tried to protect the past, other companies were building the future. They understood something Kodak forgot. Innovation is not about creating something new once. Innovation is about constantly adapting when the world changes. And that is why Kodak's story is still remembered today. Not because they failed, but because they had the chance to win. By the early 2000s, Kodak finally realized the world was changing. The company rushed to release digital cameras. But there was one problem. They were no longer leading the race. They were trying to catch up. Competitors had years of experience. Their products were better, their technology moved faster, and customers had already begun trusting other brands. Kodak was losing the battle it had once started. Then, something happened that almost nobody expected. It wasn't another camera company. It wasn't Sony, it wasn't Canon, it wasn't Fujifilm, it was the smartphone. Suddenly, millions of people were carrying a camera in their pocket. There was no film to buy, no photos to develop, no reason to carry a separate camera. Every year, smartphone cameras became better, faster, smarter, more convenient. The world changed almost overnight, and Kodak's biggest source of income, photographic film, began disappearing. Sales collapsed. Stores stopped ordering film. Photo labs closed. The business that had made Kodak a giant was vanishing before everyone's eyes. For decades, Kodak had believed film would always be part of everyday life. But technology had made that belief obsolete. The future Kodak once invented had finally caught up with them. By 2012, the impossible had become reality. Kodak, a company that had once dominated the photography industry, filed for bankruptcy. It shocked the world. For generations, Kodak had been more than just a business. It was a symbol of photography itself. Millions of families had trusted the brand with their most precious memories. But now, the giant had fallen. Thousands of employees lost their jobs. Investors watched billions of dollars disappear. Factories that once operated day and night became quiet. Buildings that had been filled with innovation stood nearly empty. The company that once employed over 140,000 people was now only a fraction of its former size. What made the story even more tragic was that Kodak had seen the future long before anyone else. They weren't defeated because they lacked brilliant engineers. They weren't defeated because they lacked money. They weren't defeated because they lacked opportunities. They had all of those things. What they lacked was the willingness to risk their own success. They protected yesterday while everyone else was building tomorrow. And in business, yesterday never wins forever. But here's the surprising part. Kodak didn't completely disappear. The company still exists today. So, how did it survive, and what lesson can every business learn from one of the biggest mistakes in corporate history? Many people believe Kodak completely disappeared after bankruptcy. But that isn't exactly true. The company survived. However, it was no longer the giant the world once knew. After leaving bankruptcy in 2013, Kodak had to completely change its direction. The company moved away from consumer photography and focused on other areas, including printing technology, imaging solutions, and specialized products. The Kodak that once filled millions of homes with cameras and film was gone. The world had moved on. But the most interesting part of the story wasn't what happened after the collapse. It was what happened before it. Because Kodak had something almost every company dreams of having, a first-mover advantage. They had the invention, they had the engineers, they had the resources, they had the brand, they had everything needed to lead the digital revolution. But having the right technology is not enough. A company also needs the courage to change before it is forced to change. Kodak's story became a warning for businesses around the world. Because sometimes the biggest threat to a company is not its competitors. Sometimes the biggest threat is refusing to leave the past behind. But was Kodak's failure really just about digital cameras, or was there a much deeper problem inside the company? Kodak believed they had time. They thought digital photography would take decades to replace film. After all, film was still making billions of dollars every year. Why rush? But outside Kodak's headquarters, something was changing. Other companies were watching. They saw the same future Kodak had seen. The difference was they weren't afraid of it. Companies like Sony, Canon, Nikon, and Fujifilm began investing heavily in digital technology. Every year, their cameras became smaller, faster, better, and more affordable. Meanwhile, Kodak continued focusing on film. It was a business that had made them rich for generations. To the executives, protecting the present seemed safer than building the future. But technology doesn't wait. Customers slowly began changing their habits. They wanted photos they could see instantly. They wanted to share memories without waiting for film to be developed. And for the first time in decades, Kodak was no longer leading the industry. The company that had invented digital photography was now chasing the companies that had embraced it. Every year, the gap grew wider. And then, another invention arrived that changed everything once again. It wasn't made by Kodak. It wasn't even made by a camera company. It was something almost no one saw coming. In 1975, something extraordinary happened inside Kodak. A young engineer named Steven Sasson was working on an unusual project. His goal wasn't to save the company. He wasn't trying to replace film. He was simply experimenting with new technology. After months of work, he built a device unlike anything the world had ever seen. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't small. In fact, it weighed almost 4 kilograms. Taking a single photo took more than 20 seconds. The image was black and white, and the resolution was incredibly low. By today's standards, it looked almost useless, but that strange machine was something revolutionary. It was the world's first digital camera. Kodak had invented the future. Steven Sasson proudly demonstrated his invention to company executives. He believed they would immediately recognize its potential. Instead, the room became silent. The executives looked at the prototype and then asked a question that would change the company's future forever. That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it. They were afraid, not because the invention was bad, but because it was too good. Kodak earned billions of dollars selling photographic film. Every digital camera sold could mean one less roll of film. To protect their existing business, they made a decision that seemed logical at the time. They chose to delay the future. What they didn't realize was that the future would arrive anyway. And when it did, it wouldn't wait for Kodak. This company changed the way the world captured memories. For nearly a century, its name was everywhere. Families trusted it. Tourists carried it. Professionals depended on it. At its peak, Kodak was one of the most powerful companies on Earth. But then, everything changed. The strange part? Kodak didn't lose because another company invented something better. It lost because it rejected its own greatest invention, an invention that could have made Kodak the most valuable technology company in the world. Instead, it became one of the biggest business failures in history. This is the story of how a company built the future and then destroyed it with its own hands. To understand what happened, we have to go back more than 100 years. In the late 1800s, photography was slow, expensive, and difficult. Taking a single picture required heavy equipment, technical knowledge, and plenty of patience. For ordinary people, photography wasn't part of everyday life. Then Kodak changed everything. Their mission was simple. You press the button, we do the rest. It sounded simple, but it completely transformed the industry. Suddenly, anyone could capture moments without being a professional photographer. Families began recording birthdays, vacations, weddings, and everyday life. Kodak wasn't just selling cameras, it was selling memories. And people loved it. Year after year, the company grew larger. By the end of the 20th century, Kodak had become a global giant. Millions of cameras, billions of photographs, tens of thousands of employees. It looked unstoppable. But behind the scene, a silent revolution had already begun, and incredibly, Kodak was the company that started it.